Welcome back, everyone, to another PT Pro from the Optimal Body Podcast. I'm Dr. Dom.
I'm Doc Jen.
And today we're going to talk hip pain, specifically hip pain on the outside of those hips. We're talking bursitis, tendonitis. If you've heard any of those things in relation to your hips, stick around.
All right, we are talking hip pain today.
Hips that don't lie. Got some hip pain. Yeah, so hip pain, talking more of that lateral hip pain or pain on the outsides of the hips. So people will talk into gluteal bursitis or gluteal tendinopathy, even the greater trochanter. So if you really feel into the outsides of your hips and you'll feel these two big bumps or knobs, those are called our trochanters. So the greater trochanter is that big and knobby thing on the outside of our hips.
Yeah, don't try to rub those out. I got a massage one time. I love massages, but my goodness, this woman was trying to rub out my greater trochanter.
Yeah.
And I felt too bad to say, that is a bone, to have her stop. So I just let her rub on my bone for a while. That was
super
a fun
comfortable
experience.
Yeah, super comfortable.
We're talking more of like that outside of the hip pain when you're doing particular activities that cause an illicit pain. Maybe if I press on the side of your hip, you can elicit that same kind of pain.
You have a lot of tenderness, totally. Yeah, and a lot of it might come on after doing a lot of activity. If you are somebody who's active or athletic and you do an activity once and you just suddenly have this weird pain on the outside of your hip that you're not used to, again, that could be this gluteal tendonitis or bursitis or whatever, because it's this acute or this short-term pain that we're getting that, again, we're not used to on the outside of our hip. So it's not something that might be coming, like you're talking about, from something more degenerative like arthritis or that FAI. We have a whole nother podcast episode on FAI. There's a lot of things that can cause pain around the hip, but a few less things that can specifically cause pain on the outside of that hip.
What we're learning more so is that, yes, you might just initially start to feel it, but it's not necessarily just that it's inflammation of that bursa or inflammation of that tendon. Yeah. This has been an overuse process, and now over time, based on putting this extra tension or lack of attention at this area, we're now getting this pain. And so rather than having it's like a bursosis.
A bursosis. Hey, look at that. We made up a new one. We should coin that quick. Call it Jennifer's bursosis.
You're welcome.
We just have chronically called it hip bursitis.
Yeah.
Oh, you've been having this hip pain. So for the past 30 years, you've been having hip bursitis. But in reality, after that extended or that chronic amount of time, we're not seeing acute inflammation anymore. Again, maybe we go on a run and the very first time it happens, we have the bursa kicking out fluid and there's lots of inflammation. But again, is that just because the bursa's angry itself? Like, no, maybe we were putting extra stress through the gluteus medius tendon and the glute minimus tendon. And that is what then irritated the bursa to cause some of that inflammation. But over time, we just see these chronic tissue changes and not as much acute inflammation. So it would be more of an osis or a gluteal tendinosis or a bursosis.
So bursa are necessary. They're all throughout our body and especially around our joints, right? To just help to lubricate and take off some of that friction that happens. So they are there to get rubbed on. They are there to create some cushioning effect, right? It's just when we're now just using that one spot.
I was looking at one study that was talking about, and they were doing 25 hip replacements on people that had diagnosed hip bursitis. And just when they went in to actually look at the bursa, and then when they went in to actually look at the joint, they're like, there's really no inflammation here at all. It's just all of these chronic tissue changes that are probably resulting in that pain. And so again, we shouldn't be doing anything to try and get rid of inflammation as much as trying to remodel these tissues and help these tissues re-understand how to support what we're doing around our hips.
Wanting to reduce inflammation within that area, well then some of these passive modalities of just doing ultrasound at the hip or just putting ice directly on your heat packs or iontophoresis or something that's just going to reduce the inflammation. Well, that's not really the goal. I mean, hey, listen, we've talked about some of these before, and if they help to reduce some of your pain for the moment so that you can start moving more, we're not against it, right? However, in general, if we're wanting to start to remodel the tissue, because that's what we're trying to work at, well, then we have to load it. We have to move.
How we dice through that, you might need to get with somebody to work through that. We might need to have a professional who can teach us how to do things slightly differently so we can still load those gluteal tendons without the pain.
But now it's just turning more into that degenerative process. So it's almost, think of it like your arthritis, like, you know, just these changes that are happening over time, which is happening already. So it's just kind of like the spectrum of diagnoses. And we always want to like look for that one diagnosis, that one thing that's causing the problem. But when really it's just like, let's look at the function, what's not working well, right? And when we look at some of these studies and stuff, we see that it's more, we might have atrophy of these muscles, of the glutes. But when we take a step back, it's like, well, I'm having pain. So was it that they're losing their muscle growth because I stopped wanting to use them so much? So is that what's relating to now seeing that people who have these bursitis or these tendinopathies, or, you know, is that why?
Yeah.
And I just need to slowly start to build up the pressure and the tension so that I'm not getting the pain? Or was it that I didn't have good muscle activation there, I already had atrophy, and that's what led to the pain? So it's hard to really know chicken or egg, what came first. But we do see that there is changes in usually those gluteal tendons on the side of the hip. So we need to start tapping back in.
Strength and being strong and able and functional predisposes us to having less pain or less symptoms, right? I mean, if we are using that and are strong about the hip, we will likely feel less pain. So what if we are feeling pain and then we start doing less? And then we lose a little bit more strength and we lose a little bit more control of that muscle and that unit. And then we might feel a little more pain. So then we might do a little bit less. And it's kind of this negative feedback where we have pain, so we do less, which results in more pain, which results in us doing less. And it's really difficult for people to figure out, okay, how does this change? Because as soon as I start doing more, I'm still going to have pain.
Right.
But that's the thing. Would we rather be having pain and doing less, or
and getting
be
worse?
Having pain, understanding how our body can work with that pain and operate and maybe move a little bit and still feel the same amount of pain or less? Or would we rather be doing nothing?
Right.
So I'd rather give my body some movement, feel how it responds, likely with guidance if we're at that point, you know, with the PT or with the doctor who's going to be kind of coaching us through that movement. But some of the worst things we can do is like, ooh, it hurts, I'm going to stop doing anything.
If we stop using it, we lose it. The thing that no one wants to hear is, how long is it going to take for this bursitis to go away? How long is it going to take for this tendon to heal? Yeah, who knows? Everybody is different, and it's going to take time, but you have to give yourself the opportunity, because that's all we have here anyways, right? We have time.
Difficult for people to understand or even hear that 6 to 8 weeks, that's how long it takes our muscles to even start to learn, like, oh, this is a new movement I should start typing in and learning myself. And then it's after those 6 to 8 weeks that we then start tapping into maybe some tendon and tissue changes minimally.
One quick test that you can do, right, is laying on your side. Make sure that your shoulders, your hips, and your feet are in a line, or you can bend the bottom leg if you want. And then lift the top leg and kick it back just a little bit so you get more of those glutes rather than the front of the hip, right? So kick it back just a little bit without arching in the back. And then lift it to where you can without moving in the hips, right? So it might not be very high, that's okay. And then hold it. And if you have someone else around you, see if they can like kind of push it down. And then test side to side. So you always want to see based on your own body, like, do I feel weaker one side versus another?
Yeah.
And this is just a good place to start to see how your muscle is even responding, right? Can it withhold even just without anyone pushing? Can you hold for like 30 seconds to a minute? Or does it start to lower? Or am I different side to side? Or does it cause pain? So where can I push into where I don't have pain.
And another thing that's can be pretty easy and might be tough for some people is just that standing on one leg. If you're noticing pain on one or both sides, is just try and lift one leg up into a march. Like you're going to hold one knee up in front of you. It's nice if you even like have a mirror to look into just to see like, okay, is my body really wanting to tilt one way versus the other? Is my hip kind of wanting to pop out? How long can I stay before I start to notice, pain or discomfort in my hip? And then switch to the other side and see if you notice a significant difference. But that's an easy way, either the one that Jen talked about laying on your side or the standing one that you can go back to that at any time and kind of retest and say, okay, how are the legs comparing to each other today or in this moment?
Mm-hmm. And then we can start, okay, what are the exercises that I can do to start building up the sides of my hip? And, you can use bands and you can do bridges with bands where you put some pressure outside on those knees. You can even start to do squats or lunges with bands around the side of your knee. So you're pressing out into it. Obviously, decrease the weight, decrease the range of motion, like move within what you're able to do. But the more that you start to tap into it and build that strength, the better that the stronger those hips are going to be. And I always say too, like, look at what you're doing. You say you're a runner who has a lot of hip pain, but all you do for strength training is double leg stuff. Like I do a lot of squatting, or I do a lot of, deadlifting, but I'm not doing single leg deadlift. I'm not doing Bulgarian split squat, So you have to also address, if I want to run, which is a single leg activity and puts a lot of stress through a single leg, am I training a single leg? So this is a good way to kind of see what you're doing in your body on a training basis that's going to relate to what you want to do and functionally.
Yeah, if standing on one leg is difficult for you and you're a runner, and if you notice you have one leg that's difficult to stand on, then try jumping from one leg to another leg and landing and holding and controlling. Because that's essentially what we do every time we run. Every time we take a step running, we're launching our body from one foot to the other, and we should be able to control ourselves through that motion and stop and pause at any time. Otherwise, that tells me that we are uncontrollably flinging ourselves from foot to foot.
Yeah.
And it doesn't surprise me that we might have pain somewhere along that chain.
Yeah. Not just working on range of motion, but working on control through the range of motion is also going to help to get some lubrication through those hips, work the muscles around those hips, and just help you to fluidly be able to move better when you're doing your exercise or you're functioning throughout the day.
Yeah, that active range of motion is huge. I mean, you'll see people who will drop and go down and touch their toes, but then if you ask them to keep their legs straight and raise it up to see how much functional hamstring length they have, like keeping your legs straight and then raising it up as high as you can, and they can't even make it to 90, but they can touch their knee to their forehead.
Yeah.
Like that tells you actively how are you able to control through your hamstring.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's like not just sitting in pigeon all day long, right? We might not need to be just stretching it, but can we control? So think about those figure four, those pigeon stretches. Well, how are we actively bringing that leg into that rotation? And what are the exercises that I'm doing to actually work in that full range of motion? So again, this is when working with a physical therapist or getting in with someone who's going to explain these ranges of motion that we're talking about, because you might be listening being like, I don't know what that is. Yeah. Looking at the Optimal Body membership and moving within it, I'm instructing the entire time. Like literally it's movement and learning from a physical therapist as you're moving through exercise. We do so many different muscle activations because it's not just about identifying weakness and working through that, but it's also identifying coordination through movement. Like how can I use my glutes while I'm deadlifting? Can I use my glutes while I'm squatting? So it's my goal with the Optimal Body, I will say, is teaching people to build that neurological connection so that they can use the muscle and then progressively load that way. Yeah. So if you're having this bursitis or this tendonitis on the side of your hip, are there movements and motions that you've been neglecting? And what can you start to test and assess within yourself? And then how can you start to load that just a little bit every day? Maybe not every day, but 3 times a week, 4 times a week, whatever.
Wherever your body's at.
Yeah.
How can
And
you
then
load
start
it?
to work that, more aggressive over time. That's progressive overload right there. And that's going to help you to start feel different. Thanks so much for sticking around and joining us. I hope that you learned a little bit about what can happen on the side of your hip. And if you have more questions, ask them below. Do some of these tests that we talked about as well. Can you hold for 30 seconds, a minute? Like, what does it feel like side to side? Let us know below so that other people are encouraged to try it out themselves. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on any future podcasts in the future.